Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. This is Vincent van Gogh in the Mid-Atlantic. 21 paintings that you can see of Vincent's in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Robert. I'll be your host, Robert Kelleman. A little bit about me. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. I was an art history major in college at the University of Michigan. I spent the first 2 years of my career working at the Detroit Institute of Arts. Then after that, I, lived in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Now I live in Texas, and I really like art, and I really like Vincent van Gogh. So thanks so much for being here. And we also have our awesome co-host, Patty, joining us once again today. Hi, Patty. You want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm joining you from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and plan to do my best to communicate with you all and really looking forward to this program. So,
Oh, Patty, you always do an awesome job.
well, we
No
try,
worries
we
there.
try.
I have 100% confidence.
Well, it's very interesting though, because somebody invariably asks the question that not only do I have no idea of, but I thought, but my response is, wow, I never thought of that. So that's what's so enjoyable about doing this is that you guys really give whole new perspectives to the whole program. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, you too. It's a team effort. So thanks, Patty, for being here. So as mentioned, this program is called Vincent van Gogh in the Mid-Atlantic. So it's not a talk about the times that Vincent van Gogh traveled to the Mid-Atlantic parts of the United States and hung out and did stuff. No, it's actually about the paintings that you can see of Vincent van Gogh's that are in the Mid-Atlantic. And so we'll learn about Vincent van Gogh. And what we'll do is we'll do it through the context of these 21 Mid-Atlantic paintings. And then, of course, we'll also talk about a few additional sources. So again, really an opportunity to learn about Vincent's life and his career through the context of these 21 paintings that are in the Mid-Atlantic. And if you're not familiar, if we have a lot of people joining us from outside the United States, which is cool. If you're not familiar with that term, the Mid-Atlantic, it refers to a part of the United States in kind of the central Atlantic coast and really centers around Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Richmond, Virginia. It just so happens the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Krieger Museum, the Phillips Collection, and the National Gallery of Art. All three of those are in Washington, D.C. And then the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. Those five museums have a total of 21 paintings by Vincent van Gogh. So if you are either living in this area or you're ever going to be visiting, it's really a great opportunity to see a lot of Vincent van Gogh artwork in a relatively close geographic proximity to one another. And the reason why that's important is because in the United States, there's not an infinite or an unlimited amount of Van Gogh paintings. In fact, these are the museums in the United States. This is my unofficial tally of how many Van Gogh paintings are in museums. And I'm hoping to put a list like this together for the whole world, but I'm still working on that one. But anyway, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, they have 18 Van Gogh paintings, which is the most not only in the United States, but in the whole entire Western Hemisphere. In fact, I think it's the most anywhere outside of Europe. And then the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., they're number two, the second largest Van Gogh collection. They have 10, and then the Art Institute Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. So to have 21 paintings in close proximity to one another is really quite extraordinary and really gives you a chance to kind of dive into Vincent's life and career and learn more about him. So I thought that's what we do. So let's look at the paintings real briefly, and then we'll go through Vincent's life in kind of a chronological order and talk about these paintings and how they kind of fit into the big picture. So these are two floral still lifes that are at the Krieger Museum in Washington, D.C. Here are three more Van Gogh paintings that are at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. And here are three that are at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond, Virginia. And three more at the Baltimore Museum of Art in Baltimore, Maryland. And then the National Gallery of Art has their 10 Van Gogh paintings. So they have these 6. And then these 4. So our 21 paintings. Let me actually go back for just a moment. Now, I do have a slight complaint to make about people. So I've lived in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. And in my opinion, people in Washington, D.C., they don't leave the area enough. So they don't go up to Baltimore as often as they should. They don't go down to Richmond as often as they should. So that's my one complaint about people in Washington, D.C., partially because so many people in D.C. are from somewhere else. They have to use their vacation time to go home and visit their family and friends back there. Or because there's so much amazing things to see in Washington, D.C., sometimes people don't venture out to that many places. But if you are in D.C., make sure you check out the Baltimore Museum of Art, which is a fabulous museum, and then also the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. So just wanted to mention that. All right, let's talk about Vincent's. So anyway, that's the kind of the thought process behind this title, Vincent van Gogh in the Mid-Atlantic. All right, so let's go discuss Vincent's life and his career, and we'll do it in mostly a chronological order. And we'll start off with Vincent's paintings that he made when he was living in the Netherlands and Belgium. Vincent was born in the Netherlands, and he doesn't begin creating art really until the age of 26 in 1879. So we're going to be talking about this 1879 to 1886 period. He's 26 to 32 years old. And here are the three works that we're going to take a look at. Two paintings and a drawing up on top. Now, Vincent made his first watercolor painting in 1879. That's over here. And he made his first oil painting in 1881. And that's here. Now, these aren't in the museums we're talking about today in the Mid-Atlantic, but they're at the Van Gogh Museum. So I just wanted to, you to see these. These aren't very well-known paintings, but let's face it, everyone should know what Vincent's first two paintings looked like in terms of watercolors and oil paint. So there you go. First two paintings. And then kind of around the same time, he ends up making this drawing that is in the collection at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This was a house that was not too far from where he was living. And he makes this a year or two before he does his first oil painting. So Vincent's early career as an artist, he's focused on doing watercolors and then drawings like this and various other things. He doesn't begin the oil painting process till a little bit later. Now, if you're hoping to go see this drawing at the National Gallery of Art, they usually don't have it on display. So it's very fragile, and they have so much other stuff that they can show. This is typically not on display, but wanted to show it to you nonetheless. And there it is. Looks pretty good. Better than I could do. And again, that's from 1879, 1880 or thereabouts. And then let's take a look at this. This is a watercolor by Vincent. He did this in 1882, and it's a beach scene. And it's not only a watercolor, it's an early watercolor of Vincent's. And there's the full view. And if you were to look at this, what do you think? Does that look like a Van Gogh painting? Maybe not if you're not familiar with his early works, because it looks very different than kind of the yellow and gold type iconic paintings of Vincent's that we're used to seeing. And this is a famous beach that's on the Hague, and this is what it looks like now. So usually when we think of beaches, we think of the summertime and going there to enjoy ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the beach in more recent times. Vincent, though, chose to portray it in the winter, and everyone's kind of all bundled up, and they've gone off to, I don't know, go for a walk or look at the water or things like that. But again, does this look like a Van Gogh painting? You'd have to probably be pretty astute as a Van Gogh person to recognize this as one of his works, because it is so different than the sunflowers and the landscapes with the yellow and gold that we're used to. But if you study Vincent's early works, it looks very similar to the other watercolors that he did around this time in his career. And so down below, those are two watercolors that are at other museums. And I thought I would include them just so you can kind of see, oh, okay, yeah. You can kind of see some similarities between all these different works. The one on the left is a church pew. And then the one on the right is a state lottery scene, people lining up outside to get their tickets and win their millions of dollars. I guess it wouldn't have been dollars at that point in time. And then here's his beach scene. Notice he didn't spend a lot of time on the faces of the people, particularly this person. Not that he couldn't do so, he just didn't want to focus on that. He wanted to spend his time doing other things. So there you have it, a beach scene from 1882. And that's at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Now, many people are familiar with Van Gogh's The Potato Eaters painting. He did this one very early in his career, 1885. It's at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. It's one of his most iconic works and probably one of his most famous early painting, or most famous painting from this era of his life. And here's a similar somewhat time frame painting at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And this is Flower Beds in Holland from 1883, or 2 years before. And this is a really unusual painting for Vincent because it's got a lot of colors in it, which he did not do very often early on in his career. So this is really kind of an anomaly, the fact that he's using so much color in a painting this early in his career. If you looked at this and didn't look at the year, you would think, oh, okay, well, that's not really all that unusual for him. But at this point in time in his career, it was very unusual for him to use that much color. And so this is actually 2 years before he ends up making The Potato Eaters, which, look at how dark this is. And this is 1885. And how that contrasts. I mean, you can kind of see a little similarity in terms of like the earth tones of the browns and the grays and the blacks of the buildings back here and the people. But this section that has all the color, very, very different than the types of works he was doing. And I've actually seen every Van Gogh painting that he ever made, not in person, but in different media, some of them in person, but some of them in different media contexts. I actually have, there's books you can buy that have every single Van Gogh painting in them. And if you look through other works that he did at this point in time, there's very, very few of them that have a lot of color like this. So that's very interesting. It's really, again, an anomaly. Here's The Potato Eaters, very kind of dark and gloomy and depressing. But then you have this nice scene with the flowers and this figure walking through the flower fields. Now, why did Vincent paint his works so dark? Well, that's kind of what he was used to. One of the great things about the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., they have such a encyclopedia-like collection of art. You can go and really look and see just about anything. And if you go through and look at the paintings that were done before Impressionism, it really kind of helps you understand how different and how impactful Impressionism was. So, for instance, here's a couple of works by another famous Dutch painter, Rembrandt. So this is Old Woman Plucking a Fowl from 1650 or thereabouts. And then here's a self-portrait that Rembrandt did from 1659. And if you look at these two paintings, hey, this is before the internet and television and Instagram and color photography. So Vincent had heard of the Impressionists, but he hadn't seen any of their works. This is the type of work that he was used to looking at. This is kind of the classic Dutch painting. So, you know, that saying, you do what you know. Well, this is what Vincent knew. He knew of people making paintings with these really dark colors like Rembrandt. So that's what he ends up doing. It's not till he gets to Paris that he really ends up infusing a lot of color in his works. And so that's what he does. Now, other artists were using a lot of color and trying different things. And so this is a great artist, not super well known, but I really like a lot. His name is Gérôme. He was a French artist. And this is just so happens to be at another Mid-Atlantic museum, the Walters Art Museum, which is in Baltimore, another great place you should visit. And this is a painting called Tulip Folly, and this is from 1882. And it's actually the year before Vincent's work. And you can see, okay, this guy who's living in Paris, he's heard about using a lot of color because that's what he's doing. Vincent, who's making his painting a year later, hasn't really heard as much about that. And so he's not really doing that. with the exception of these bulb fields. So it is really interesting to kind of compare and contrast these two. Here's this one. This painting is really spectacular. Again, it's by Jerome. It's at the Walters Museum in Baltimore. So if you get a chance, you should check that out. It's called Tulip Folly. And then here's Vincent's flower scene, and much more grayer, even like the sky. If you look at the sky, the clouds are kind of got like a brownish, grayish hue. They're not like those fluffy white cotton type colors that you'd expect maybe to see in some clouds. But that being said, really nice painting nonetheless. And there's our figure walking through the flower fields. And gee, really wish you could see this in person and kind of compare and contrast it with Vincent's painting. It looks really spectacular. And there you have it, flower beds in Holland from 1883. It's really an anomaly in Vincent's career because he's using colors to such a great extent at such an early point in time in his career. And there's our three works from the Vincent van Gogh early years. All right, so in February of 1886, a month before he turns 33, Vincent ends up moving to Paris, where he would end up living for 2 years. So we're going to jump ahead to February 1886. Vincent is a month before his 33rd birthday. He moves to Paris, and he makes these four paintings, among others. These four we're going to focus on because these are the ones that are at our Mid-Atlantic museums. Vincent was born and raised in the Netherlands, and he ends up spending the last several years of his life in France. In fact, some people sometimes get confused and think maybe that Vincent was French. No, he wasn't. He was Dutch, but he does spend the last several years of his life living in France. First, he goes up to Paris. He spends 2 years there. Then he goes down to the south of France, where he spends 27 months. And then he spends the final 10 weeks of his life back up in the north of France. So Vincent spends the final, say, 4.5 years of his life in France. And he moves to Paris. And why does Vincent move to Paris? Well, because it's the center of the art world, and also because his brother Theo is living there. So Vincent's younger brother Theo was an art dealer. He managed an art gallery, and the company that he worked for transferred Theo to Paris to run their Paris operation. Vincent's very close to his brother Theo. They're best friends, and so the fact that he's living there really prompts Vincent to want to go there as well. And then also, Paris is the center of the art world, and Vincent wants to be a professional artist, so it makes sense that he would move there, kind of maybe equivalent to, say, someone that wants to break into the movie business would probably move to Hollywood instead of staying in, I don't know, Detroit or wherever. So that's why he goes to Paris. He wants to be a professional artist, and Paris is the center of the art world. And then also his buddy and his brother and his best friend Theo is living there. Now, Vincent famously makes his sunflower series of paintings, these great floral still lifes that are filled with all this great blue or yellow and gold coloring. But before he painted the sunflowers, he did a lot of other flower still lifes, including these four. So it just so happens that 4 of the 21 paintings we're talking about are floral still lifes from Vincent. So he does end up painting a lot of flowers during his career, including these two, which really love these two, particularly the one on the left. I really think that's an amazing painting. And surprisingly enough, as amazing as this painting is, it's not all that well known outside of Washington, D.C., or for at least Vincent van Gogh experts. And this was made 1886, vase with carnations and other flowers. And this is at the Krieger Museum in Washington, D.C. Krieger Museum. And again, this is a beautiful still life that Vincent made when he was living in Paris. And it's really a transitional work. We'll talk about what that means in just a second. And then also at the Krieger, they have this companion piece, Bowl of Zinnias, also from 1886. And this is also done when he's living in Paris. And so those two are a nice complement to one another. Now, before Vincent moved to Paris, he didn't really paint flowers, hardly ever, only once. So before Vincent moves, and this painting is at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, called Vase with Honesty. And before Vincent moved to Paris, he made 235 oil paintings. So Vincent makes 235 oil paintings before he moves to Paris. And of those, only one of them is a still life with flowers. It's this painting right here. And not only that, notice how dark this painting is. Yeah, the flowers themselves are pretty light, but the background is really, really dark. So interesting to look at that. But then when Vincent moves to Paris, he ends up starting to paint a lot of flowers. And so this is a really key moment in his life and career as things really kind of take a different trajectory, so to speak. So Vincent makes 251 oil paintings while he's living in Paris, and 51 of them, or about one out of every 5 or 20%, are floral still lifes. He did this beautiful one that's at the Detroit Institute of Arts. This one is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And then this one is in a private collection. So he goes from making just one floral still life out of 235 paintings. He transitions to making 51 floral still lifes out of 251 paintings. So why did he all of a sudden start painting all these flowers as soon as he got to Paris? Well, let's have Vincent tell you himself. He said in a letter to his sister about a year after he moved to Paris, "A year ago, I painted nothing but flowers to accustom myself to other colors. I painted in pink, soft and glaring green, light blue, violet, yellow, orange, and a beautiful red." So Vincent moves to Paris and he sees all these other artists are making paintings that have all these bright, beautiful colors. And it's not something that he'd really done all that much of. And so he needs to practice and get better at that thing. So he ends up painting all these different flowers because he wants to practice with using different types of colors. And what better way to practice painting colors than doing depictions of flowers? And so he makes this painting. I just really love this painting. I'm surprised it's not more well known. It's not an unknown painting, but when I see, like, I don't know, magazine articles and books and stuff about Vincent, I really don't see this one very often. The Krieger Museum is a great museum, but it's not as well known as, say, the National Gallery of Art or the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But I really, really love this painting. It's really spectacular. I really like the blue background, and then of course the flowers are gorgeous. Nope, you already saw that. And then here's a close-up. And it's even on a floral tablecloth. That's a nice touch. And hey, maybe you're getting ready to decorate your home and you're trying to figure out what would make your house look more appealing. Well, you can always get some Van Gogh artwork to put in your living room or your bedroom room or wherever. So I just happened to stumble across these two images when I was researching this program. So there you go, some decorating ideas for you. And then the museum also has this piece, which is a great companion piece as well, and another beautiful still life of flowers. Oops, I went the wrong way, sorry. And then there's a close-up and the full view. So Vincent's known for these sunflowers, but before he got to Paris, he wasn't really making any flowers. So this period of time when he's in Paris is really like a great transitional point for him, not only in terms of actually just making paintings of flowers, but his use of color and experimenting with different types of colors and things like that. So this is a really great transitional point in time in his career. And you see that by looking at these paintings, like this one, Bowl with Zinnias, and Vase with Carnations and Other Flowers. All right, let's go to Baltimore and talk about this interesting painting, A Pair of Shoes from 1887. And this painting has really kind of significant working class symbolism. And then also, you might not notice it by first looking at it, but Vincent was really, really proud of this painting. And you can tell that by the way it was created. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. Here's the full view. I know you might be thinking, why on earth would he paint his shoes? Well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. So if you saw the film At Eternity's Gate, there's a scene where Vincent's kind of cooped up inside one day, and he ends up painting his shoes. Now, this is the painting that Willem Dafoe made in the film. That's actually not a real Van Gogh painting, but that's okay, just using artistic liberties. And then here's the shoes over here that he's painting. And why would he do that? Well, Vincent spends a lot of time walking around Paris. Vincent, now walking is really popular. Vincent was ahead of his time. He liked to walk a lot too. And so he would spend a good portion of his days just kind of walking around the city and exploring things and checking stuff out. So he would go through shoes a lot because he's walking so much. And to Vincent, these kind of working class shoes really kind of symbolized his connection with the working class. Notice these aren't fancy shoes that you're going to be wearing to the opera or the theater or something like that. These are just regular working man shoes. He would actually buy these at like flea markets and stuff like that just to save money. But he would go through them a lot because he's walking so much. So to him, these really kind of had like a powerful symbolism, his connection to the working class. And now you probably know or familiar with the idea that Vincent really didn't sell many paintings while he was alive. He actually only sold one painting for cash. He did barter several of his paintings for like food and stuff. But as far as actually selling paintings, he only sold one during his career. Now, why is that? Well, let's kind of look at some other artists that are on display at the National Gallery of Art. So Monet, he thinks that a good series of paintings would be the water lilies in his garden. And he was correct. Those were really, really popular and they sold a lot. Degas thinks that, hey, another good series of works to do would be paintings on ballet dancers at the Paris Opera. Oh, yeah, yeah, that's a great idea too. Those were really popular and sold a lot. What's Vincent's great idea? Well, he's going to put a series of paintings together of his old, dirty, worn out shoes. Um, and you can kind of see maybe where that wouldn't be quite as appealing for people that were collecting art as, say, water lilies or opera dancers or things like that. So Vincent was kind of, hey, I'm just going to paint what I'm going to paint and people are just going to have to deal with it. But that kind of does cause problems when he's trying to sell his artwork. So that's the story behind that. And then here's the painting itself. Now, he put a lot of time into this painting, and you can tell that by looking at it closely. So what I mean by that is he would have had to paint this over the course of several different sessions. Sometimes when Vincent was painting a work like an oil painting, he would do it all in one session. He'd sometimes even do it in one day, or maybe even less than a day if he was really pressed for time. But this painting he would have put together over the course of several different sessions. And you can tell that by the color and how they're put together. So it's maybe not clear to the visual eye, but he would have painted the bottom of the shoe first, this kind of lighter color. Then he would have gone back after that paint dried, and oil paint takes a fair amount of time to dry. Then he would have gone back like the next day or a few days later, and he would have painted in these kind of silver colored pieces, the metal of the shoe, and put that in. Then he would have needed that paint to dry, and he would have come back another time later, a few days or the next day or whatever, and painted like the scuff marks of the shoe and like these colors here, the green and stuff. So this wasn't something he put together very quickly. He spent a lot of time on this painting, and consequently, he was very proud of it. Vincent usually signed paintings when he was felt like he was completely finished with them and was proud of the fact that he did that. And so you can see his signature over here, Vincent 87. And then here's what I'm talking about, the color. So he would have painted this light brown surface here first. He would have needed the paint to dry, which would have taken a little bit of time for it to dry completely. And you can tell that because the colors aren't mixed together. Sometimes when an artist is making a painting and they're doing it quickly, they don't wait around for the colors to dry. They just put it down and it blends together or something like that. But that's not what he did here. The colors are very clearly defined between, say, like the light brown and like this silvery grayish white color. So he would have needed this brown to dry. And then he goes back later and then puts in like these scuff marks with the darker color. And that also is not mixed in with the different colors of paint. And so he would have done this over the course of several different days to put this together. So interesting on that regard. And there's the full view. And it's called A Pair of Shoes, 1887, and again at the Baltimore Museum of Art. All right, let's continue on. Here's another working class kind of theme. This is a laundry boat, and it's on the Seine. And so what is a laundry boat? Well, we'll talk about that. Here's the full view of the painting. So during this era, governments and different organizations were trying to get people to be more clean and have better hygiene. And so running water is becoming a thing at this point in time in history, but mostly just for wealthy people. Regular everyday people didn't have access to running water at this point in time. So what the city government does, they set up these laundry boats on the river, and people could come here and do their laundry. It's right on the water. You can clean and scrub and do all that stuff, get your clothes clean. And here's actually a picture of one on the Seine in Paris. And so that's what Vincent ends up actually painting. So again, kind of talking before about the subject selection. This is a place where wealthy people aren't going to go. They're not going to go to the laundry boat because they're either going to have running water in their home or they're going to have someone do their laundry for them. And so this would have been like a working class type of thing. But Vincent, that's what he's into. He's into that kind of socioeconomic group. He connects with those people, and so that's what he ends up doing in this painting. But with people that are collecting art in Paris at this point in time, this is probably not something that they're going to be interested in doing. I mean, think about it today. Like if you were a millionaire and you were going out and buying some artwork, would you go out and buy a painting of like a laundromat? No, probably not. You'd probably go buy a painting of some thing that was appealing to wealthy people if you were a wealthy person. And so the laundry boat. This is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. And when you see paintings like this, it really kind of, Vincent's painting what his interests are, and he's painting things that he feels connected to. So when you see things like his old shoes and laundry boats and starving potato eaters and stuff like that, you really kind of get a sense of, what he's all about and what he feels connected to. So there's Vincent's Paris paintings. All right, so then let's talk about Vincent's time in the south of France. After 2 years of living in Paris, Vincent goes to the south of France. He moved there in February of 1888, and he arrived about a month before he turned 35. So Vincent's up here in Paris. He spends 2 years here, then he goes to the south of France. Now, why would he do that? Well, there's three main reasons why Vincent moves to the south of France. Number one, he's just a very restless guy, Vincent is. He's constantly on the move and going to different places. So he just gets kind of bored and restless. He's your Rolling Stone kind of guy. So that's number one. Number two, as Vincent gets older, he talks about how he discovers he really doesn't like cold weather. And even though Paris is maybe not as cold as Minnesota in the United States, it still can get pretty chilly there. Whereas the south of France, if you're not familiar with the geography and climate of France, the south of France has a climate that's similar to maybe like Southern California. And so that's very appealing to him as well. And even though Vincent liked living with his brother and being in the center of the art world, Paris was just too intense for Vincent. It was just too many people. It was too busy. Initially, that was kind of appealing to him, but over time, he realized, hey, I want something a little more slower paced, a little more laid back, not as many people. So that's why he goes to the south of France. And these aren't paintings that are at the museums we're talking about, but these are famous paintings that Vincent made while he's living in the south of France. A lot of the iconic Van Gogh paintings were made during this time when he's living in the south of France. You've probably seen at least a few of these and maybe even all of them. And these are some of the paintings that Vincent makes while he's living in the south of France that are at our museums we're talking about in the Mid-Atlantic. So here's the first one. This is Entrance to the Public Garden in Arles. This is from 1888. This is an interesting painting because there's a historical marker at the site where Vincent painted this. And then also interesting kind of contrast between photography and the feelings that Vincent had for a particular place. Let's talk about this one. Here's the full view. Now, if you go to this site, this is in a town called Arles, A-R-L-E-S, in the south of France. If you go to this park, they actually have this historical marker signifying this is the spot where Vincent made this painting that's at the Phillips. It says Phillips Gallery. It's actually the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C., but that's okay. So here's the painting we're looking at. And then here's the actual garden that it was painted in, or the park that it was painted in. So that's pretty cool. And they have that a lot in these different places that are connected to Vincent. They'll have historical markers identifying the spots where he made some of his paintings. And so here is the Van Gogh painting. And then here's the park in more recent times. And then here's the historical marker over here. So what do you think? Which looks better, the painting or the real thing? And then here's a quote from Vincent. I just started painting the recollection of the garden. And then he says in another letter, I know it's hardly a true likeness, but for me, it renders the poetic character and style of the gardens as I feel them. So this is a really great quote from Vincent because he's really giving you insight into what he's trying to accomplish. He's saying essentially here that he knows this is not a photographic like representation of what the garden looks like. By this point in time, photography is very popular. A lot of people are going around snapping pictures. Vincent's not trying to make a photographic like image of the garden. What he's trying to do is show the poetic character and style of the gardens as I feel them, I being, of course, Vincent. So this is really insightful to kind of get into his thinking of why he ends up making the paintings the way that he does. And a close up. And the full view. All right, let's continue on. Here is another floral still life. These are some daisies, and this is an interesting work because of the top-down perspective, and then also the earth tones of the paint, and the fact that the paint is extremely thick, and you can see that. So let's take a look at it. Here's the full view. And remember, we said that Vincent, 4 of the paintings that he made of these batch of 21 are floral still lifes. Notice these 3, though, you're kind of looking at the flowers more head on. They're almost kind of at eye level. Whereas this one, you're looking from the top down on the flower. So the perspective on this one is different. And that's something you should be thinking about when you look at art. What is the perspective and why did the artist choose that? Vincent likes to experiment a lot and during his career and try different things. So I think maybe for him, he just thought he would try a different approach. And thus this top-down perspective, as opposed to like a more head-on perspective that he did in these other ones. And of course, even if you look at the sunflowers, these are kind of more at eye level as well. And so when you're looking at art, another thing to kind of think about is something different than the norm. So, okay, well, yeah, because he's usually not doing this top-down perspective. He's usually doing more of like a head-on type of look, like more the traditional look. But for whatever reason, he decided for this one, he's going to do the top-down deal and get you that kind of focus, perhaps because these aren't very tall. He wants you to be able to see down into the leaves and things. And then the paint is really, really thick. And you can see that in a lot of Van Gogh paintings, but some more so than others. So let's take a look at that. And so here's the full view of the painting over on the left. And then what I did is I've zoomed in on this bottom right corner. And look at this over here. And so you can see, wow, you can see the brush strokes of him putting this really thick paint on here. And this was something that was a little bit different from other artists at this time. Usually what artists would do is they would smooth this out. So that you couldn't see these brush strokes. Vincent doesn't want to be bothered with that. He doesn't feel like that's necessary. And so he doesn't do that. And so that's another reason why his artwork didn't sell, because people thought it was kind of unfinished because he had not smoothed out the brush strokes. Fast forward a century and a half, and that's actually now one of the things people like about Vincent's work. Like, oh, wow, look, you can actually see the brush strokes that he used or made to create the painting. So interesting how our tastes change over time. And again, that's called Daisies from Arles. It's at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. And it's got this interesting top-down perspective and the earth tones and the thick paint. Here's another one that's a top-down perspective. Sometimes you see this with Vincent. He'll try something and he'll do it in several different paintings. And so here's kind of another top-down perspective. And this one has these iconic yellows and golds that Vincent is so well known for. This one's at the National Gallery of Art. This is called Still Life of Oranges and Lemons with Blue Gloves from 1888. And here's the full view. Again, kind of a top-down perspective, so we can look in the basket and see the fruit. He's got this greenery here to kind of add some visual context. What I find interesting, what are these gloves for? Those don't look like maybe gloves that he would own. Maybe they're women's gloves. I don't know. I've never really been able to figure out what the story is with the blue gloves from anyone at the National Gallery that I've seen them publish. But it does have a really nice color contrast between the yellow and oranges of the fruits. Blue is the contrast color of yellow and orange, or one of them. And a close-up. But those don't look like maybe men's gloves that you would wear, at least not today. I don't know, maybe fashion was a little bit different back then. But what's the story with the gloves, Vincent? And there you have it, National Gallery of Art, 1888, Still Life of Oranges and Lemons with Blue Gloves. Now, this is an amazing transformation that takes place in Vincent's life in terms of his use of light colors. And this really gets started when he's in Paris, but it continues on when he's in the south of France. So look at the 3-year difference between these paintings. The Potato Eaters is made in 1885. And when he was living in the Netherlands, and then he goes to the south of France and 3 years later makes this painting. And if you didn't know any better, you would really be tempted to think this must be two different artists. There's no way the same artist could have made these two paintings, particularly not in the kind of the same roughly time frame, only 3 years apart. But in fact, of course, these are both Vincent van Gogh. And it really goes to show you how much his style changed in terms of embracing light and colors and things like that. Now, this is at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, this particular painting, and it was done in 1888. And this is a harvest scene. And then this is the one that we're looking at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., also from 1888. It's called Farmhouse in Provence. And has the iconic yellow and gold color. And then this is also what they call a plein air painting. Vincent actually set up his easel outside and painted this. And then there's a similar painting at a museum in the Netherlands, Haystacks from 1888. And so how do all these three paintings fit together? Well, here they are. And so here's the one at the National Gallery of Art on the bottom left. And then you can see the similar time frame was the one at the Van Gogh Museum. And then you can see this one over here is also similar. And if you look closely enough, these are actually the same buildings. So this building here is the same building over here. And so he would have been walking around and seen this, and he painted from this vantage point. And then he moved and kind of positioned himself over here and has the haystacks in between himself and the house. Here's a better view of that. So this building here is the same building that's right here. And in this view, he's facing the house on the left and the haystacks on the right. This view, he's got the haystacks in between himself and the house. So that's pretty cool. Vincent giving you two different vantage points from the same spot. What would have been really cool is he would have maybe done one or two more. But hey, two enough is good. And then at this point in time, this is what they call a plein air painting. A lot of painters, for the most part, before Impressionism, painted their works inside in a studio. So here's two paintings, and you have our artists, him, and they're painting inside the studio. Even though this gentleman's painting a landscape painting, he's still doing it indoors. The artist would go outside, they'd make sketches and drawings, they'd then bring those back into the studio and they'd make the painting there. But Vincent is making his paintings outdoors, like a lot of other impressionists. It's not something that's not a process that Vincent invented himself. Monet did that, Renoir, many others. And so, but it's just a different process than had been done in decades prior to Impressionism. If you've seen the movie At Eternity's Gate or Lust for Life, you see the actors portraying Vincent in these different outdoor scenes where they're painting. And so here's some stills from the film. And so that's what Vincent's doing. He's walking around the countryside looking for interesting things to paint. When he sees something that captures his attention, he will set up his easel and go to work. This is a really beautiful painting. Boy, a lot of color going on here. Not only just yellow and gold, but you have the red of these flowers and this greenish blue sky. And it's like a whole rainbow of colors in here. And again, to go back to that other slide, oops, how different that is from the potato eaters that he had made just 3 years earlier. So really incredible transformations, almost like a butterfly blooming with Vincent and his use of color and how much he changed in such a short period of time. If you study artists, it's not unusual for an artist style to change over the course of time. Claude Monet's style changed quite a bit over the course of his life. Georgia O'Keeffe's style changed. Frida Kahlo's changed in different ways, and that's not really all that uncommon. But to have it change that much in a short time frame, like 3 years, is really quite extraordinary. You don't see anything like that very often in the history of art. Jump ahead. Here's a close-up, and here's our, presuming this is the farmer, owner of the house, and he's walking away from us. And again, these beautiful red colors and the haystacks. Another scene you wish you could see in person. So our friends at the National Gallery of Art made this video, and it's really more for kids, but I did think the video did a good job of explaining this painting and kind of get you some things to think about. So let me go ahead and cue this up, and after that, we'll continue on with our program.
Dear Theo, it has become very different from what it was in spring, and yet I have certainly no less love for this countryside, scorched as it begins to be from now on. There's old gold, bronze, and copper in everything, with the azure green of the incandescent sky that gives a delicious, extraordinarily harmonious color.
Artist Vincent van Gogh wrote these words in a letter to his brother. He had recently moved to southern France and was describing the way the countryside looked in summer. In this painting of a farmhouse and fields, Van Gogh used lots of gold and yellow tones to describe the dry, scorched grass. 3 haystacks are piled high behind the stone gate. The hay has been harvested and stacked to dry in preparation for winter. The red and green plants and flowers in the front have reached full bloom. Thick vertical brush strokes make up the grains of wheat and grasses. They reach up high on the legs of the man who walks through the field. Whew, I'm thirsty just looking at this painting. Where do you think the man is going? Perhaps he has finished a day's work in the fields and is headed inside the farmhouse to get a cool drink of water and escape from the blazing sun. Summer was Van Gogh's favorite season, and he made many paintings depicting wheat fields and farms during the summer harvest. In 1888, Van Gogh decided to leave the bustling city life of Paris. He moved to a quiet, sleepy little town named Arles in an area of southern France called Provence. The region has scorching hot summers and bright, strong sunshine. The dazzling sunlight, glowing wheat fields, and blooming sunflowers were very different than any place Van Gogh had lived before. He was inspired by the beauty of the landscape and worked hard there, often painting outdoors to capture the bright colors and intense light around him. In this painting, Van Gogh experimented with vivid color, intense brush strokes, and bold outlines. Van Gogh used a variety of brush strokes here, from the swirling sky to the blobs of flowers and the cross-hatched fence. When Van Gogh moved to Provence, there was still snow on the ground. Imagine how different this scene would look if he had painted it in winter.
All right, thanks to our friends at the National Gallery of Art for that video. All right, let's continue on. We actually talked about this painting in the program we had a few weeks ago. This is Rousseau's Baby from 1888, and this is Vincent's friend, the postman. This is his painting, or his baby, and this is one of 22 paintings that Vincent made of the family. So let's talk about this one, and here is the baby. Now, Vincent did a whole series of paintings of his friend, the postman. You may recognize these. These are some of the more well-known portraits that Vincent did. His friend, the postman, who he met in the south of France. But in addition to doing the postman, he also did depictions of his wife, Augustine, their two sons, and the mother and child, and then also the baby by herself. So this is Marcel Rousseau, the postman's daughter. And here's our one at the National Gallery of Art. And here's the whole series. So he makes all these paintings of his friend, the postman, and the postman's family. So a really incredible series of works that Vincent did. And here's a quote from Vincent in a letter he wrote to his brother Theo. "I'm now working on a portrait of the postman with his dark blue and yellow uniform, a head like that of Socrates. His wife had a baby today, so he feels on top of the world and glows with satisfaction." And then later on he says, "I hope I will also get to paint the infant born today." Well, he would eventually get his wish and end up painting her. She actually later in life became kind of somewhat famous because Vincent had made these portraits of her. So here she is, a little bit older in life. And it's got this really interesting green background. And even the face and the arms are very greenish. The whole thing is very green. And she's sitting there very contently. So imagine that. Imagine having Vincent van Gogh paint your baby portrait. That would be pretty cool. And that's what he did in 1888. All right, here's another iconic, well-known Van Gogh painting. And let's talk about this one. It has a really great Japanese influence. And then people really always look at her hands in this painting. So we'll talk about that because I always get a lot of questions about this one. If you saw the film Loving Vincent, you might remember that this painting was featured as a character in the film. You can see that there. And then it's always neat when you see artwork used in different contexts. So if you were flipping through Vogue magazine a few years ago, I'm going to say, oh, wow, that's quite an outfit she's wearing. Well, it's because it's based on an outfit from a Vincent van Gogh painting with the stripes the vertical stripes, and the polka dots. Now, Vincent was really inspired by Japanese art and history and culture. He never got a chance to visit Japan, but he really studied the culture and the art quite a bit. In fact, he would take images that he saw and he would end up making paintings from them. So this was a famous novel that was released in May of 1886. And then Vincent ends up making a painting based on the book cover. So you can see that. And then here's another example. This is a famous Japanese print from 1857. And then Vincent ends up making a painting version in his own hand in 1887. So here's the Vincent version of this famous Japanese print. And then here's another famous print from Japan, 1857. And again, in 1887, Vincent makes this version. So here's the original, and here's his version. And Vincent would talk oftentimes in his letters about his early appreciation for the Japanese and their artwork and the landscape, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a famous novel that had come out that Vincent had read. And this was a well-known book throughout the cultured circles of France, so to speak. And so Vincent ends up reading this, and it's actually still in print today. You might be familiar with this one. And so Vincent's image here is kind of like the character from the novel. This woman is not Japanese because there probably weren't very many Japanese people, if any, living in this small town in France, but he probably found a girl that kind of maybe had some similar features, and maybe had dark hair, and then he gets her to pose. We really don't know who this woman is or what her story is. But at some point in time, Vincent able to get her to pose for him. And it's a really interesting painting. Notice it's got the green background again, although not as dark as the baby portrait. And again, that great contrast with the vertical lines of her top and the polka dots with her dress. And then, of course, she's holding these flowers. And so again, that's kind of Vincent's Japanese influence showing. Here's a close-up of her face. It's really unfortunate we don't know who she is because this is one of his well-known paintings. And when I used to lead tours of the National Gallery of Art when I lived in Washington, D.C. And almost every time someone would ask, what's going on with her hands? They look very unusual. And there's a story behind that. Vincent could paint her hands if he wanted to, but he didn't want to spend the time. He would prefer to just do it this way and then kind of move on to the next thing. So I'll show you more about that in just a minute. So Vincent was very talented artist. He could make hands if he wanted to. So here are drawings that he did, and to give you a level of detail. So look at these hands. Hands are very difficult for an artist to correctly do, and it takes a fair amount of time to portray them accurately. So these drawings here show you that, yeah, Vincent has the talent. He can make hands look realistic if he chooses to. So that's not the issue. But why are her hands like this? Well, he doesn't want to spend the time on that. Now, he did spend a lot of time on this painting, and we know that because he did these two drawings of it. So this was something that he invested a fair amount of time in. If an artist does these prep drawings beforehand, that means that they really want to make sure that they have the composition figured out and some of the details, et cetera, et cetera. So perhaps when this woman posed for him, he perhaps just made the initial drawing, and then from there ended up making the painting. But we know that he spent a fair amount of time putting this together because of the prep work that he put with the drawings. And so here's the hands. And why do you do that? Well, he probably just didn't, I'm guessing, but I'm thinking that he probably just didn't want to spend the time that it would have taken to put the detail in with the hands. He'd rather kind of just do it this way and then spend that time painting something else, because he knows that he can make the hands look realistic if he wants to. He doesn't even really want you to focus on the hands. He really wants you to focus more on the woman's face and her clothing and stuff like that. But that being said, because the hands are so kind of unusual looking, people tend to, their eyes tend to look at that, because I can't tell you how many, what a large percentage of the tours that I would do where I would show people this painting, inevitably someone would say, what's up with her hands? So that's kind of the story behind that, from my opinion. And then interestingly enough, the Museum of Modern Art in New York City opened in 1929, or 39 years after Vincent died. And this painting was one of the first paintings that was ever on display at the Museum of Modern Art. It actually wasn't owned by the Museum of Modern Art at that point in time, but when it opened, it was here. Now, this was a black and white photo. I pasted color images of the artwork just so you can get a sense of what it would have looked like on the wall. So this is a Gauguin painting, and then there's the postman. We were talking about him earlier. So this painting has the distinction of being one of the first paintings ever on display at the Museum of Modern Art. And it's from 1888. Now I'm kind of curious to know what you guys think about this painting. So I picked 3 images of Vincent's where we could kind of take a break and a quick timeout and kind of see what people think. So when you're looking at this painting, what do you see? What do you think about this work? It's a pretty well-known Vincent van Gogh painting. It's not his most famous work like his self-portraits or the sunflowers. But if you had to rank the paintings that Vincent made in terms of like notoriety, so to speak, this one would be up there. It's not the most famous, but it's definitely not an unknown painting. But it's kind of unusual with the clothing and the Japanese theme and the hands and the green background and kind of all that other stuff. So, but I was kind of curious to know what your thoughts are. So if you have any kind of thoughts or opinions about this painting, feel free to share those in the chat or the Q&A. Let's check in. Patty, what do you think about this one? What comes to mind when you look at this? And then what is the audience also saying about this?
Well, we have audience members. Maggie had pointed out that the left arm has a similar greenish shade to the green baby. But to me, and I think we're in agreement on that, that looks more like shadow as opposed to an entirely green baby. That several people have commented on that one, and I confess no matter how many times I look at his paintings, I just have trouble fitting that one painting in with the rest of his work,
Oh yeah, I remember we discussed it a few weeks ago. That's why I mentioned that. It's funny.
And let's see, is it Howard? Somebody also is Michael, thinking that the hand looks unfinished, but I think we see that in a lot of Vincent's paintings. It strikes me that he had such a hunger to express, and as you said, he could finish things, but and was capable of very exquisite detail. But in some of those paintings, I feel like, okay, got it, I'm ready to move on. And you had
Oh no, that's a great point. We should talk about that. So yeah, that's one thing to know about it. He's very restless. He's an impatient, restless guy. And I kind of wonder if, maybe he just been working on this for a while and he's kind of, I don't want to say bored, but he's ready kind of for the next thing. And so he like, okay, this is done. I'm finished. I didn't do the hands completely, but whatever, I'm on to the next painting.
Yeah, and you pointed out in the past that a lot of his paintings are unsigned, and he's tended to only sign those he considered finished. So yeah, he had a very restless spirit. He was always looking, or he was easily, I don't know, easily, I wasn't there, but he was attracted to new experience, which seems ideally suited in a way to developing impressionism, right? It's the garden painting that you talked about to some extent shows that it wasn't the garden itself, it was the way the garden made him feel.
Oh yeah, no, that's very true. Helene brought up a good point. What attracts my eyes first are the buttons on the dress. I never noticed that, but that's interesting that's what she focused on. So that's cool. And then someone asked if she's perhaps related to the postman's family. I don't think they know who this woman is or what her story is, unfortunately. So I don't know if I could be mistaken, but I don't believe I've ever seen any information on who she is. So I mean, I guess it's possible, but this is the only known image that he made, or the only known painting that he made after he did those drawings.
She has a very interesting expression, and he spends a lot of time on her face and head, and those eyes really are captivating too. Those eyes are very present in the painting.
Oh yeah, much more so. Like I don't notice her eyes initially when I look at this painting, but as I start to study it more, I'm like, oh yeah, her eyes are very pronounced, and she looks very poised, and um, she looks comfortable and kind of confident in that regards. Some of Vincent's portraits, when you look at them, particularly if they're women, they look a little apprehensive as they're sitting there, perhaps because I don't know the way he's acting or something. But you don't really get that sense here.
And there is, especially in this shot, there's a definite suggestion of light in the eyes. I mean, there's an aliveness there that I
Hmm.
don't think is in every single one.
Hmm.
But so yeah, he really, especially when you show the sketches, I mean, he really seemed to be very involved with this painting, and yet you have that repetitive desire to move on too. So it's an interesting look at his character too. I think when you put all these together.
Yeah, so these aren't the hands from the woman. These are just different
Right,
hands that
but
he made, just to
that's what I'm
clarify
saying.
that.
He's
And then, yeah,
capable
here's
of,
these other ones.
and look at these studies of these different studies of the eyes on the same woman. He was really very focused on her expression and her face
Hmm.
as
Yeah,
much as the
that's a good point.
painting.
I never thought about that, but yeah, this one in particular, I mean, it's pretty much just her face. But that's one reason why artists make these drawings and sketches. They want to get all these details out of the way first, and then do the painting. They don't want to have to go repaint like the person's face if it's not set up the way they like. But that's interesting. I never thought about the kind of the eyes and how maybe he was kind of experimenting with different things on that.
Yeah, if you look at the one on the left here, I mean, you don't get a lot of detail in the eye, but that sense of light in the eye is there.
Hmm.
Um, and then if you look at the one on the right, you've got the detail of the eye, but not that glow of life or light. So I think he might have really been, or it looks to me like he might have really been working on trying to capture something there. And maybe in the painting, the reason it looks unfinished is he finally felt like he had it. You know?
I got
Um,
this one.
yeah, I mean, each of those studies, the eyes look a little bit different.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
as well,
I should have lined the painting up with the uh, uh, drawings in the same slide. But that being said, but yeah, you can see it. The three of them look a little bit different.
maybe that's part of it. Maybe he started off like being fascinated with the Japanese contrasts of patterns and colors, and then in with this particular woman, he got pretty fascinated with that, with that sense of herself that came through her face and eyes.
You brought up a great point. That is a very kind of Japanese-esque thing, these contrasting patterns. And that's also what I would, if I could talk to Vince and be like, was this actually the outfit that she was wearing, or was that, something that you created yourself
Yes, because
on her?
that
I
comes
don't
up.
know.
Yeah,
What's
that
that?
comes up with the wallpaper with the Roulin family, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I
that
mean,
that is,
maybe that's what she was wearing, or maybe he just added that. Maybe she wasn't wearing that at all, and he just added that himself to kind of make it look more visually interesting. So,
and interesting, going back to that, the planter with flowers that you showed, there was one of them actually looked like the one that was looking down. It almost looked like it could have been floating in one of Monet's paintings of his water garden. It just had the background look very much like that. And again, with Van Gogh, that's a question in so many of his paintings is, was that the real background, or was that the background he decided fit that particular subject?
oh yeah. All right. Well, hold that thought because we're going to talk about another Van Gogh portrait in just a moment. But these are 6 paintings he made in the south of France. Now he makes 5 more paintings while he's living in the south of France, these 5, and the most famous being his self-portrait. We'll be talking about this painting in detail in just a moment. And here it is. It's very iconic. Not only is this one of the most famous paintings at the National Gallery of Art, it's also one of the most famous paintings that Vincent ever made. It's one of the most famous self-portraits that he did. So it really kind of checks off a lot of boxes, so to speak. And this one also has an interesting story behind it. So here's Vincent, and it's got these yellowish color facial features and the blue background. And here's a couple quotes from Vincent to his brother Theo. "I'm working on 2 portraits of myself at the moment for want of another model." So Vincent wanted to do some portraits. He couldn't find anyone else to pose for him, so he poses for himself. And then he says, "One of them I began the first day I got up. I was thin and pale as a devil. It's dark violet blue, and the head is whitish with yellow hair." So it's a color study. That's one of the things that's neat about Vincent. A lot of the paintings that he made, he talked about in letters that he wrote to his brother or other people. So you can kind of get a sense of what he was thinking. This was not too long after he had gotten out of the hospital when he had had the ear incident. And I put this together. This is the 36 self-portraits that Vincent made during his lifetime. And how I set this up is this is the first one he made up here in the top left. And then he made these ones on the top row from left to right. Then he made the ones in the second row from left to right, third row left to right, and fourth row left to right. You can see this is where he had the ear incident because he's got the bandages on his head. And then this is the first portrait he made afterwards. You'll notice that these portraits, he's all facing the same direction. And also notice how different this is from the Rembrandt portrait that's at the National Gallery of Art that we talked about earlier. If you go visit the National Gallery of Art, these 2 paintings are not very far from one another. It's maybe like a 5-minute walk to get from the Rembrandt portrait to the Van Gogh. But notice how different these are in terms of the colors that they're using. And then this is also an interesting painting because if you look at it closely, this image is actually from the National Gallery of Art. It's like an X-ray type image. But what's cool about this is they're showing all the different brush strokes that Vincent uses. So here's his eyes, and then these are the brush strokes that are over here. And notice the variety. So you have a straight line that's vertical. You have a straight line that's diagonal. You have these curved lines. You have this kind of U-shaped here, the zigzag, a little dash here. But look at the variety of lines that he's using to put this together. And that's the way it is throughout the whole entire painting. So that's a pretty cool kind of vantage point of giving you a sense of what the technique he's using to put these together.
Robert, a technical question here. He describes himself in those words you showed as being pale or as in white as a ghost or something like that. The head is whitish, and I'm looking at it, and yet it has that green we keep talking about. Is it possible that whatever the paint compound he was using could have been more white and over time has developed this tone? I mean, clearly he's showing shadow.
Oh yeah, no, that's definitely a possibility. I don't know how much to the extent that's happened with this one because he does kind of have a lot of this kind of yellowish green color, but no, that's definitely possible when you look at his works because he was poor and a lot of the paints he used weren't the best quality. So
right, and there's also an effort to portray shadow. If you look down below at the shirt does look very white, but with that blue tint, and that could be explained by reflection from the smock. But it just occurred to me when we read that description that just doesn't suggest white to me.
Mhm. Oh yeah, and it is a great contrast. So if you're not familiar with this painting, what Patty referred to, he's wearing a smock. And so what you would do is you'd put this like shirt over your regular clothes and you would tie the ends here to kind of keep it together. And then it's easy to just pull one of these ends, almost like pulling a shoe lace, and then the smock would come off. So he's wearing a blue, what they call a painter's smock. And then he's holding his palette here. Well, actually, let me hold off on that and then we zoom in, I'll explain what I mean. So there's the swirling colors around his head. And he's got this very serious look on his face. And as I mentioned, this was done not too long after he got out of the hospital. Here's the string of the smock, and look at his beard, the orange and gold coloring. And then this is also interesting. If you think of like the outline of something, you'd probably think of black. But here he's actually repeating the blue coloring in the outline of the thumb handle of the palette. And then also the palette itself has an outline in blue. And that was something that was relatively new during the Impressionist time. Monet and Renoir, they would do the same things. Artists before Impressionism, if they were making these outlines, they would almost always use black. The Impressionists decided, why limit ourselves to black? Why not use other colors as well? And so you can see a great example of Vincent doing that. I also have a short video from the National Gallery of Art on this one. So let's take a look at what they had to say. Hold on for 1 second. Let me cue this up.
Look closely at this self-portrait. What clues tell us about the subject? Start with his clothing. This man wears a blue painter's smock over his white shirt. And do you see that he holds several paintbrushes while gripping a palette covered with blobs of yellow, blue, green, and pink paint? You are looking at Vincent van Gogh, painting himself as an artist. Van Gogh is known for his unique style of painting with energetic brushstrokes. He made each brushstroke visible as opposed to blending or smoothing them together. Look for the short, squiggly lines that make up his beard and hair. The longer, rhythmic strokes on his clothing. And the flame-like strokes of paint around his head that seem to make the whole background pulse. Van Gogh was also known for using intense colors. He said,
Instead of trying to reproduce what I have before my eyes, I use color to express myself forcibly.
Which colors did Van Gogh use most in this painting? Notice the blue background and blue smock. Van Gogh also used blue to outline the paintbrushes, the palette in his hand, and the edge of his nose. He also used a lot of green, yellow, and orange, especially in his hair, beard, and skin. At the time he made this painting, Van Gogh was recuperating from a mental breakdown. What clues in the painting tell us how he might be feeling? Vincent van Gogh was born in Holland, but he spent much of his life working in France. When he painted this self-portrait, he was living in a region of southern France. Van Gogh had become ill and was feeling very sad when he made this self-portrait. He believed that making art would help his health improve. Van Gogh's career as an artist lasted only 10 years. He died not long after he made this painting. But just as he appears in this self-portrait, Van Gogh was a very sensitive and thoughtful painter who was passionate about art. He said,
Portraits excite me to the depth of my soul. They make me feel the infinite more than anything else.
Imagine making your own self-portrait. What colors would you use to express yourself?
So I do a whole separate program where I talk about all 36 of the Van Gogh self-portraits. It's not on the calendar, so I don't know when I'll be doing it again, but I'll be doing it some point in time. So if you want to learn more about the actual portraits, all the self-portraits that Van Gogh made, you can check that program out. Again, it'll be repeated, I don't know, some point in time in the future after the first of the year. And there you have it, Vincent's self-portrait from 1888. All right, let's continue on. Here's a painting from the Phillips collection. This is called The Road Menders, and this painting has a Cleveland connection to it, and it's a great example of Vincent's interest in both trees and manual laborers. So Vincent was walking down the street one day and he saw these people were repairing the road, and he thought this would make a really great painting. And so he stopped to put this together. Vincent was really interested in trees. He's also very interested, we talked about before, in manual laborers. This is a photograph. This is not from the Vincent van Gogh time or from modern times. It's kind of in between, but this is the area of France that he ended up doing the depiction of. And you can see here's the road. And then what happened was, when he saw this taking place, he didn't have a canvas available. He had used up all of his canvas. So he took a sheet and painted this on the sheet. And then he sent a telegram to his brother Theo telling him, hey, can you advance me some money, please, so I can go out and buy another canvas? Because I saw this really cool road construction project taking place. And so that's what ends up happening. So this first one in the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is also a great museum, is painted on a sheet, actually. And then this one is actually on a canvas. If you look at the two side by side, you can see they're pretty similar, but he did make a few differences here and there. Again, this is called the road menders, or I guess the way you translate it from French to English, like the road repairmen or something like that. They're essentially redoing the road. Here's the one in Cleveland. Here's the one at the Phillips collection. And in the close-up, you can see those dark outline lines and the curvy lines, and then the green and the yellow. And even though it's called the road menders, notice the trees really have a starring role in this painting. All right, let's continue on. This is called Wheat Field behind St. Paul Hospital. This is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. This was during a time when Vincent was staying in the hospital. This painting is connected to his Starry Night painting. So here's the painting itself. Vincent was in a mental asylum at this point in time. He spent a year there trying to get well, and there's a sculpture of him outside. While he's in this hospital, he ends up doing the Starry Night painting. That also has a fascinating story behind it. This was the hospital room that Vincent was staying in. Has iron bars on the wall. He's not allowed to go outside unless he has permission, which sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. And he ends up making the Starry Night. And then during that same time frame, on a time when he could go outside, he makes this painting, which I'm thinking he put this one together pretty quickly. But notice it's got kind of like the same swirly look of the sky as the Starry Night. So let me go back to the Starry Night. It's famous for a variety of reasons, one of them being this swirly sky. And of course, that's a night scene. And then he does this one during the day, and it also has kind of like this swirly look. And there's quite a few paintings from this era or this time frame that have kind of a similar characteristic to them. And again, that's in Richmond. Vincent was really fascinated by olive trees because they're very curvilinear. So this was a whole nother series that he did, olive trees. And again, more interest in manual labor, people doing physical work. These are three women that are taking the olives from the tree. These are the olive tree. If you haven't seen an olive tree in person, this is what they look like. He was really intrigued by the fact that these were so curvy, as opposed to like the straight up and down trunk of a traditional tree. And then here's another historical marker talking about the fact that he was really into those. There's a very similar painting to this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. For our friends there, might recognize that. And then landscape with trees and figures. This is at the Baltimore Museum of Art. This is another, again, series of trees, and it was done when he was in the hospital. Look at the lines here, interesting, and then the colors. So you have light blue here for the sky, bluish green with horizontal lines for the hills, and then the trees are like these green and yellow colors. And the ground, and then the figure, and building off here to the side. And again, we're going through these paintings in essentially chronological order for Vincent's life. And those were 5 more of the ones he did in the south of France. All right, we're in the home stretch. We're talking about the final 10 weeks of Vincent's life. He died in July of 1890. In May of 1890, 10 weeks before that, he ends up moving to a town called Auvers in the north of France. He was 36 years old, and he ends up making these 4 paintings. And we'll take a look at all these. We'll actually take a time out and do a discussion on this one when we get towards the end. So Vincent, after 27 months in the south of France, he moves up to the north of France, and this town is north of Paris. He moved because I think he really felt like his time in the south of France was kind of a slight disaster. He didn't sell any of his paintings while he was there. He had the problem with the ear. He was in the mental asylum for a year. He didn't have any romantic relationships that we know of. He's also just very restless. So I think he really just kind of wanted a fresh start and a clean slate. He moves up to the north of France. And you can actually visit this town. It makes a great day trip if you're in Paris. So here's Paris, and if you go about 40-minute or 45-minute drive, if there's no traffic, you can get up to Auvers. When Vincent was living here, this was a very small town. There was only 2,000 people living there. Now it's really kind of part of the Parisian sprawl, so to speak. And remember, we were talking about this iconic yellow and gold color that Vincent uses over and over again. He's one of the things that he's known for, but he also does a lot of blues and greens. And so, like, for instance, look at these paintings that he's doing during this time frame. Where is that iconic yellow and gold? Well, you can see it a little bit here and there, but you can also see a lot of green and bluish green in these 4 paintings. Now, Vincent's mom, who was back in the Netherlands, was really worried about him because of the ear and the fact that he was in a mental hospital and et cetera, et cetera. And so she sends Vincent letters expressing her concern for his health and well-being. And so to kind of let her know that he's okay, he ends up doing these 4 floral works. So these are also well-known images that Vincent made. And this one in the top middle or top center is at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And it's called Roses from 1890. It's an ensemble, one of 4 paintings that he made of flowers, and it was a gift for his mom. Notice this is done in the last year of his life, 1890, same year he painted this. And here it is. It's beautiful on the screen, but even more so when you see this in person. This painting is really spectacular. The picture on the screen does not do this one justice at all. So keep that in mind. And then from the same series, he did this one. That's the Metropolitan Museum of Art, also of roses. And then he did 2 of irises. This one, which is at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And this one, which is also irises, but it's also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So the series of 4 paintings, one's at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, 2 are at the Met in New York, and one's at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And here are the irises. And here are the roses. This one on the left being the one at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. There's that greenish background again, and you have the curvilinear lines of the flowers and the beautiful green coloring. Here's a letter that Vincent wrote to his brother. For days I've been meaning to answer your letter, but I did not get around to writing because I was painting from morning to night. And so the time passed. And then another instance, he says, I'm working on a canvas of roses on a bright green background. And in the last few days at Saint-Remy, I worked in a frenzy, big bouquets of flowers, violet irises, big bouquets of roses. And that was a letter that Vincent wrote to his sister. A lot of great details on this flower painting, these beautiful roses. Now, as intriguing as these paintings are now, the colors of these have actually changed a little bit over time. So initially, these are the paintings the way they look now on the bottom row. And on the top row are artistic recreations of what they think the paintings look like. So this one, they're very similar. This particular version, they actually think the background, or they know that the background was actually pink, but over time the pink color has faded on these. And then this one over here, the pink flowers have faded, so they look like they're all white. And then the same thing here. This is the one at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And notice at one point in time when Vincent first made these, the colors of some of the flowers were pinkish color. But Vincent sometimes used, he didn't have a lot of money, and sometimes he didn't use paint of the greatest quality. And, you know, decades later, some of those paints have faded. And so this painting looks a little bit different than it would have when it was first created. But that being said, I think it still looks spectacular nonetheless. And so this is the irises and roses that Vincent painted to send to his mom back in the Netherlands when she wrote him a letter telling him that she was very concerned about his health and well-being. And so he sends these paintings as a gift to mom to show her that he's okay. And so that's a nice touching story. Vincent's mom outlived him and got to see him become somewhat of a famous artist. He didn't achieve kind of rock star fame until after she passed away. But by the time she reached her later years in life, Vincent was a pretty well-known artist. So that was nice that she got to see that. And if you want to learn more about those paintings at the Met, I have a program just like this, except instead of talking about the Mid-Atlantic paintings, we talk about the ones that are at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I think it's actually taking place at the end of November. So you can join us for that. All right, let's look at some more paintings. These are blue and green colors again. And notice the swirls of the sky. And this is at the National Gallery of Art. This is green wheat fields in Auvers. I thought it was interesting. I was on LinkedIn and I saw the National Gallery Art page because I follow them, and they had this as their banner image. At least they did at this point in time, so that's cool. Of all the artwork they're going to choose for their banner page on LinkedIn, they chose this one. So I thought that was neat. And then we were talking before about Starry Night and the swirly sky. And you can see kind of a similar type of approach here with his swirly strokes of the sky with the clouds. And there's really beautiful lush green colors. And then here's another one that has a lot of blue and green. This is some houses in Auvers. And this is a wheat field with houses in the background. And again, more blues and greens. It's nice how he included these white brush strokes here, these white paint brush strokes, kind of mix things up a little bit. And this is at the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C. All right, let's talk about this painting. This is Girl in White. This is at the National Gallery of Art. This is also pretty well-known work by Vincent van Gogh. And again, we got the blues and the greens here. And this is actually one of the last paintings he made before he died. So Vincent passed away in 1890. And it's the same year he made this painting. And this one, you might remember this character from the Loving Vincent animated film. They also used this painting in the film. I liked the fact that they used it in the film. I was kind of disappointed because this character is kind of like a mean person in the film, but this painting doesn't really strike me as a person who's mean. But that being said, they used it in the film nonetheless. And here's what Vincent has to say about portraits in a letter to his brother Theo. I should like to paint portraits that a century later to people living then will seem like apparitions. So I'm not trying to achieve this through photographic likeness, but through the expression of emotions, using our modern knowledge of taste for color as a means of expression. So Vincent's not trying to make this as a photographic likeness of this woman, but is instead trying to show expression through color. What kind of expressions do you think he's showing here? And it's an interesting kind of compare and contrast with the woman that we saw earlier. Maybe the hands are a little bit similar. This is an indoor scene. This is an outdoor scene. This one, she's sitting. This one, the woman is standing. This one has a much plainer background. This one's a lot busier of a background because she's positioned up against, I'm guessing that this is a wheat field. She has a hat on. She doesn't, although she has a ribbon. And then we were talking before about her clothes and the contrast between the striped top and the bottom polka dots. And then here, though, her clothing is all white. So really kind of interesting compare and contrast between these two paintings, which are about 2 or 3 years apart, both females. We also don't know who this woman is, unfortunately. That's too bad. And here she is. And I really like this painting a lot too. It's really beautiful to look at up close in person. She does have kind of like a sad look on her face, in my opinion. Be curious to see what your thoughts are. And then here's her hands again. And the full view. And again, this is Girl in White from 1890. It's a great use of blues and greens, and it's one of his last paintings. But what do you see when you look at this painting, and what do you think? So, Patty, what do you think and see on this one? And what does our audience see and think?
Well, this lady is so prominently featured in Loving Vincent that as soon as I see a flash of this painting, that's what I think of. I'm looking at the strokes in the bottom on both sides. Those are very interesting strokes, don't you think?
Oh yeah, no, they are a lot, and kind of wondering what how he decided to put that, because it's very, very different than the rest of the painting.
Yeah, I was looking to see if I could find anything like that anywhere else. So that those definitely pop out. Very, very interesting. I had just typed that the sense of sternness, and yet when you said sad, that is also quite plausible. So much of what we see in these comes from where we're at the time we see them, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it could be. I'm a happy person in a good mood usually, so but this one looks like she is a little sad, perhaps, or maybe she's just thinking. I don't know. You're not really. It'd be interesting to see what other people have to say. I've opened up the Zoom chat, so if you want other people to see what your questions and comments are, just change the TO to everyone, and they'll be able to do that. Or I'm happy to approve them as well. So yeah, I don't know on this one. I don't know if she's sad. To me, she just maybe looks like she's more kind of deep in thought. But
Introspective, yeah.
Introspective. But that being said, someone might think she's sad, and that's fine.
And comments coming up about the blues and yellows too. I don't know that if just an abstract, if I were trying to think of any particular colors that I strongly associate with Vincent, and yet through this program early on, the flower beds, as much as his early paintings were such a departure from, or his later paintings were such a departure from his early ones, that theme of those blues and yellows and that little tinge of green, that's what I thought of as soon as I looked at those flower beds, because this lasts all the way through.
Oh really?
Yeah, think about that. I mean, most of his early period paintings are so dark, and yet in that one you have the there's pinks also, but the blues and yellows really stand out, and a slight green. And here we are at the other end of his career, and we still keep going back to the blues and yellows. The last paintings are very, very strong, especially in those blues as well, but this one has both. So again, I don't know if you asked me abstractly, if I would associate any particular colors. Yellow, obviously, but it is kind of balanced by the blue green.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and that's the thing with with the yellow and gold is like the color that people so closely associate with Vincent, but there are a lot of paintings that have a lot of greens and bluish greens. So kind of something to be on the lookout for as people are looking at Van Gogh's. The yellow and gold coloring gets like 95% of the talk or the press, so to speak, on Vincent, but there is a lot of green, and he's really interested in nature. He likes being outside and walking, and when you think of outdoors, you think of the color green. So it kind of makes sense that he would include that. And then also, this is a woman's indoors, but to go back to what you were mentioning, I wonder if the background actually was green. Were the walls where she was at painted green, or he just decided to add that just because he likes the color green, and it's an interesting kind of complementary contrast to her clothing that she's wearing. But here he actually does have the green background because she's outside. Someone pointed out they like the orange flowers. Yeah, that's a really nice touch as well.
It pops the painting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it pops the paintings. Yeah, it makes it look more like visually interesting in that regard. So yeah, two great portraits of Vincent van Gogh. It's unfortunate we don't know who these two women are, but that's pretty neat nonetheless. And what do you think about that? What about the clothing? Okay, you have the kind of the solid white, but it looks like a patterned white, but it's a solid white color, and then how different that is from the patterns over here.
Yeah, and a completely different place. Howard had written something. He talked about having read an article on physics that focused on, I am not in any way capable of explaining this, but the specific physical patterns that are actually in alignment with real phenomena in our world. And as soon as I read that, I thought, yeah, that would explain a lot about how intensely Vincent experienced so much of the world, so much of the time, right?
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of people like to focus in on moods and mental illness and that sort of thing. But what if it were just something so simple as he was like very tuned into his surroundings all of the time?
Uh-huh.
That would have been a lot to live with, I think.
Oh yeah, it
Very,
could be. You never know.
yeah. And according to Howard, this article, had scientific, measurements to bear it out. And so I found, yeah, here it is. That's it. Very interesting, I think.
Well, I thought this was interesting. KP brought up a good point. Does she look pregnant? I don't know. It's a good question.
I
You
think that's
gotta
more the
look at it.
style. If you notice, look at that very nipped in, almost a clearly corseted look to the figure. I
Uh-huh.
think that's just an impression of the style.
Yeah, it could
Um,
be. Or,
yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I guess if it came out that she was actually pregnant, it wouldn't surprise me all. And then here was another interesting comment. It was from John. Maybe Van Gogh didn't really try and paint her face in detail, so her expression is plain, although not happy or really sad. So that's also a good point too. Maybe we're just overanalyzing her face and what
Yes,
that might
there
be.
is that whole issue that gets talked about a lot, that just resting face. And how often, let's see, I was in a conversation the other day on Hopper and the faces, and somebody was going on about how all of his people look so sad. And so it's sort of like with Hopper, you can see that people could easily, there's so few people in his paintings that they could easily project sad. But the point is, people are not usually smiling in paintings, and so you have that constant problem of the resting face, right?
Oh yeah, well yeah, especially in this era, we didn't talk about in this program, but usually if you see photographs of people in this era, they're not smiling. This is the Victorian era. People are much more serious, so we kind of have to make sure we don't overanalyze things, kind of in that regard.
Well, exactly, but that's what I'm saying. People tend to, that resting face phenomenon, people are bringing themselves to that, as
Oh yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to
Mhm.
what you see is the resting face, but you see it as what you're, where you're at that moment.
Mhm. Oh yeah, no, definitely.
Amazing. I mean, yeah, the more you look at this, yes, you could see it in different ways, and yet it's benign. Overall, it's a benign face. There's no daggers leaping out or anything like that, you know? And I agree, because you had talked about how in Loving Vincent she's portrayed as kind of a mean lady, and you could see it on a cursory glance, somebody could interpret it that way, but it's really a resting face. She's in her world at that moment, and he's depicting her in her world.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen the film Loving Vincent, they take all these Van Gogh paintings and they convert it into an animated film. And there's several well-known paintings from Van Gogh in the film. But when I saw it for the first time, I was like, oh yeah, I know that. I know that painting. I've seen it all the time.
Yeah,
So if you get a chance to check
once
it
you've
out.
seen Loving Vincent, you can never forget. That's the first thing you're going to think of when you
Uh,
see this woman, I think, because, and also the son. I mean, if you think of the Roulin
oh
family,
yeah, yeah.
interesting that he would pick that out of all the family members depicted, that he was the one chosen to be throughout the Loving Vincent movie. So
Yeah, that
um,
is like you would have thought it would have been more likely for him to pick the postman because he was so close to him, but maybe they just thought it'd be more of appealing of a story. It was a younger single guy as opposed to a middle-aged married guy,
and I
perhaps.
just love that postman. I am so grateful always that that man was in Vincent's life.
Oh yeah, no,
I mean, I don't know anything specific about their relationship, and yet he just is such a kindly looking figure. And Vincent always portrays that kindliness in all of his paintings of him.
let's see. I did want to mention because a couple people brought it up. So they're having this big Van Gogh exhibit actually in my Detroit at my former employer, the Detroit Institute of Art. So I was hoping at one point in time to maybe organize like a group trip to Detroit for people that were interested in going to see this together. But I just, at the moment, to be honest with you, I don't have the time to organize something like that. It takes a lot of time and effort to organize any kind of group trip. So I'm sure I'll be seeing this at some point in time myself because I go to Detroit on a regular basis to go back and see my family. But if you get a chance, you should check out this exhibit because it's the biggest Van Gogh exhibit that they're having in recent memory, particularly because of COVID. And what it's called is Van Gogh in America. And it's going to be running through January 22nd of 2023 at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And it really has to do with how did Vincent become famous? He's the guy who didn't really sell any paintings except for the one instance throughout his career. And so Van Gogh in America celebrates the DIA's status as the first public museum in the United States to purchase a painting by Vincent van Gogh. So the Detroit Institute of Arts was the first American museum to purchase a Van Gogh painting, and this was the painting they purchased, this self-portrait of Vincent. Vincent van
George
Gogh.
also mentioned that the narration was recorded by his granddaughter, Theo's granddaughter. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's cool. On the 100th anniversary of its acquisition, experienced 74 authentic works from around the world. So we're talking about the number of paintings that museums have in their collection. To see 74 Van Gogh works is a real blockbuster. Let's see, and talking about that, and there's a catalog and book if you can get such, and then here's one of the paintings we saw from the National Gallery of Art. So if you can't get to DC, or if you are in DC and you're hoping to see the roses that's temporarily on display in Detroit, and then here's some of the other paintings that they have. Here's the postman's wife. Remember we saw her earlier.
That's a very pleasant portrayal of her right there.
Yeah, she doesn't look too annoyed in that one.
Exactly. There are several where she looks like, why am I doing this?
And here is the postman. So this one is actually in the Detroit Institute of Arts collection. It's one of their paintings. And so again, it's a really fascinating topic. How did Vincent become famous in America? And this exhibit explores that. And so look at all these great iconic Van Gogh paintings that you can see if you go to Detroit. So there you have it. The exhibit's called Van Gogh in America. Now, unfortunately, I pretty sure this is the only museum that's displaying this. Sometimes when there's a special exhibit, it'll go to different museums and you have additional opportunities to see it. But I think because the DIA organized it itself, this is the only place that this is going to be. So if you want to go check it out, you got to make sure you do so between now and January 22nd. So I thought I would share that with you. Thanks for the people that reminded me about that. And let's go back to our program. For 1 second. All right, and those were the paintings that Vincent made when he was living in the south of France. Vincent ended up dying in the town of Auvers of a gunshot wound that some people think was self-inflicted, although there's a little bit of debate about that. And here's his gravestone. Vincent was born in 1853. He died in 1890 at the age of 37. And again, our program tonight, Vincent van Gogh in the Mid-Atlantic. There's these 21 Van Gogh paintings at these 5 museums. So the Baltimore Museum of Art, and then in Washington, D.C., you have the Krieger Museum, the Phillips Collection, and the National Gallery of Art. And then down in Richmond, you have the Virginia Museum of Fine Art. So if you are in the Mid-Atlantic or going to be visiting that area, it's really a great opportunity to see all these different types of Van Gogh works from the different phases of his career. And just as kind of a recap, these were the two that are the two. They're at the Krieger Museum in Washington, D.C. These are the 3 that are at the Phillips Collection, also in Washington, D.C. These are the 3 that are at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. Richmond is about 90 miles south of Washington, D.C. And these 3 are at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Baltimore is about 45 miles northeast of Washington, D.C. So you would never be able to see all these paintings in the same day. But if you were there in the area over a couple days, you could check them out. And then, of course, these are 6 of the National Gallery of Art's collection of 10. And then these 4. I should have done a survey to ask people which of the 21 they liked best, but I'll do that. And then here's a great quote from Vincent. I want to make art that will touch people. So I do have a short video to play at the end of our program. So you want to stick around for that in just a minute. Before I do though, so I'm currently residing in Texas. And if you're ever in Dallas, if you live in Dallas or ever want to come down for a visit, you should check out our Dallas, Texas History and Culture group. We actually go visit museums. This picture on the bottom left is actually me giving a tour, an Impressionism tour of the Dallas Museum of Art. They actually have Van Gogh paintings there as well. And then sometimes we go on walks and check out restaurants and do all that kind of fun stuff. So if you want to check that out, you can Google us or look us up on Meetup, Eventbrite, or Facebook. It's called Dallas, Texas History and Culture. And here, I'll do you a favor. I'll paste the link in the chat in Zoom. And again, I'm kind of really bummed out that we didn't organize the group trip to Detroit, but work demands come first. And so we're able to do that. But if you are in Dallas, you can come check us out there. And then Washington, D.C. History and Culture, our parent organization is a nonprofit. Usually all the programs we do are free. And the reason why our programs are free, people make donations, periodically support the work we do. If you made a donation to support us in the past, thank you very much. It pays for our Zoom bill, our Meetup websites, our Eventbrite email system, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to make a donation in the future, you can do so by PayPal, Venmo, or GoFundMe. And this information is also in the event description where you signed up. And then coming up next month, I guess the highlight would be we're doing a program about the Barnes collection in Philadelphia. We'll be talking about Modigliani, Matisse, and Picasso. I don't know the exact date for that, but perhaps we'll see you for that. And then we also have the Van Gogh at the Metropolitan Museum Art program. But this has been Van Gogh in the Mid-Atlantic. And as I mentioned, I've been recording this program. So if you joined us late or if you want to watch it again, I'll email out the YouTube link. I probably won't be able to do that till tomorrow, though. And let me